Welcome, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling the Orthodox Church.
Ooh, a big one.
It is. It's a fascinating branch of Christianity, full of rich traditions and a history that goes way back.
Way back. People often think of the Orthodox Church as, well, one thing. But it's more complex than that, isn't it?
Definitely. We'll be exploring both Eastern and Oriental Orthodoxy. And
hmm
you know what? We'll also compare them to Roman Catholicism, the branch most of us in the West are more familiar with.
Good plan. Because there are some key differences and some fascinating concepts we'll unpack along the way.
Like what?
Well, have you ever heard of Miaphysitism?
You know what now?
Miaphysitism, it's a unique way of understanding Jesus. And the veneration of saints and icons, that's another thing we'll dive into.
I'm all ears. I've always been curious about icons. They're so striking. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up a bit.
Sounds good.
We're talking about one of the oldest branches of Christianity, tracing its roots back to Jesus and the apostles.
Right. And it's had a massive influence on history and culture. For centuries, it was the dominant form of Christianity in huge parts of the world.
Like where?
Think the Eastern Mediterranean, Eastern Europe, Russia. Its impact is immense.
Okay, so big impact, historically and geographically. Makes sense. Now let's get to those two main branches, Eastern and Oriental Orthodoxy. Give us the high-level view first. What makes them distinct?
Imagine them like siblings, yeah. Shared family tree, but different personalities. They both have that deep connection to early Christianity and a vibrant sacramental life. Plus, they both believe in apostolic succession.
Apostolic succession. What's that again?
It means their bishops can trace their lineage all the way back to the apostles.
Wow. An unbroken chain going back centuries. That's amazing. But you said there are differences between Eastern and Oriental Orthodoxy.
Oh, definitely. The biggest one lies in how they understand the nature of Christ. It caused a major rift back in the 5th century, a theological point that's at the heart of their separation, something we'll definitely get into.
I'm already hooked. So let's start with Eastern Orthodoxy. Is it just one big organization?
Not at all. Unlike the Roman Catholic Church, it's more like a family of independent churches, each one called autocephalous.
Auto what now?
Autocephalous. It means they govern themselves. They're independent but unified by shared beliefs and practices.
So, like independent states, but part of a larger family. Interesting structure. Is it tied to the history of the Great Schism, that split you mentioned?
Absolutely. The Great Schism of 1054. It's a major turning point in Christian history. For centuries, the church was mostly unified.
And then, boom, everything changed.
You could say that. Tensions had been building for a while, theological disagreements, cultural clashes, power struggles, you name it. In 1054, it all came to a head. The Pope in Rome and the Patriarch of Constantinople basically excommunicated each other.
Excommunicated. That's a pretty serious church fight.
It was. One of the big sticking points was the role of the Pope. The Western Church, which became the Roman Catholic Church, believed in papal supremacy of the Pope as the ultimate authority. But the Eastern Church, not so much. They believed in conciliarity, shared authority among bishops. The Patriarch of Constantinople was first among equals, not a supreme ruler.
Ah, so a clash of leadership styles was a big part of it. Were there any other major disagreements?
You bet. Theology, for example. The Eastern Church developed distinct theological views on things like the Holy Trinity, the divinity of Christ, and they put a lot of emphasis on holy tradition.
What's holy tradition exactly? Sounds like more than just old rituals.
Right. It's about teachings passed down from the apostles and the early church fathers. For them, it's an equally important source of revelation alongside Scripture. It's not just about what's written, but how those teachings have been understood and lived throughout history.
Okay, so a deeper understanding of faith passed down through generations.
Got it.
What about their services? What's a typical Eastern Orthodox service like?
The heart of their worship is something called the Divine Liturgy, a beautiful ancient service that revolves around the Eucharist.
The Eucharist, that's the bread and wine, right? Like communion.
Right. But it's more than a symbolic gesture. They believe it truly becomes the body and blood of Christ.
Powerful stuff. And I bet those icons play a big role in their services too.
Absolutely. We'll get to icons later, but first, let's talk about those autocephalous churches. How many are we talking about here? Quite a few. Each with its own unique history and expressions. There's the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, and many more.
Wow, that's a lot of churches, each one totally independent.
In terms of governance, yes, each has its own structure and leadership, but they're united by shared faith, traditions, and acceptance of each other's legitimacy.
So independent but united. I think I'm starting to get it. But what about the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople? He's like the head honcho, right?
Not quite. He holds a special position of honor, being based in modern-day Istanbul, and he's considered first among equals, but he doesn't have direct authority over the other churches. He's more like a respected elder statesman, someone everyone listens to.
Okay, that clears things up. So we've got Eastern Orthodoxy, a network of self-governing churches spread across the world, all united by a shared heritage. It's a fascinating structure. But there's another side to this story, Oriental Orthodoxy. And that's where we're headed next.
Ready to jump back in time. We're going all the way back to the 5th century. Oriental Orthodoxy is just as old as its Eastern sibling.
Sounds like a long trip. But first, remind me what makes these two branches different.
It boils down to Christology, how they understand the nature of Jesus. And to get this, we need to go back to a pivotal event, the Council of Chalcedon, 451 AD.
A council. Sounds kind of dramatic.
Oh, it was. This council was trying to settle a big debate. Was Christ fully divine, fully human, or a mix of both? The answer they came up with is called the Chalcedonian definition.
Yeah, what'd they decide?
They said Christ has two natures, one divine, one human, united in one person. This became the standard for Eastern Orthodoxy and later the Roman Catholic Church.
Gotcha, so that's where they landed. But the Oriental Orthodox Church didn't agree.
Exactly. They rejected the Chalcedonian definition. They felt it divided Christ too sharply. So they embraced a doctrine called Miaphysitism.
Okay, Miaphysitism. Now that's a mouthful. Break it down for me.
Mia means one. Physis means nature. So Miaphysitism says Christ has one unified nature, both divine and human, inseparably joined, all about preserving the unity of Christ.
So they didn't deny his divinity or humanity. They just saw those two natures as completely intertwined.
You got it. And this little distinction, it caused a huge rift, a historical turning point. It's amazing how small differences in interpretation can have such big ripple effects, right?
Mind-blowing. So because of this disagreement, Oriental Orthodoxy went its own way. What else makes them unique?
Well, like the Eastern Orthodox, they also have autocephalous churches, self-governing, each with their own leader, like a patriarch. They have a deep respect for Scripture, the teachings of the early church fathers, and a vibrant sacramental life.
They also have the 7 sacraments.
They do, but here's where some of those unique differences come in. While they have the same 7 sacraments as the Eastern Orthodox, they've got their own distinctive liturgical traditions and often use different languages in their services.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
You've got the Coptic Rite, the Armenian Rite, the West Syriac Rite, to name a few.
So much diversity. Every time we peel back a layer, it seems like there's even more to discover.
Yeah.
Can we get a quick overview of the churches in the Oriental Orthodox communion?
Sure. There are 6 main ones. The Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria, the Armenian Apostolic Church, the Syriac Orthodox Church, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the Malankar Orthodox Syrian Church, also known as the Indian Orthodox Church, and the Eritrean Orthodox Church, each one shaped by its history and region.
Wow. Orthodoxy stretches far and wide. But I gotta admit, it's a lot to keep straight. Can we do a compare and contrast, just to make sure I'm following?
Great idea. Big picture time. So the main difference, remember, is the Christology.
2 natures versus 1 unified nature. Right.
Bingo. And this one difference has had a huge impact. Eastern Orthodoxy accepts the first 7 ecumenical councils, including Chalcedon. Oriental Orthodoxy rejects Chalcedon, but keeps the 3 before it.
Different councils, different Christology.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But they both reject papal authority, don't they?
Yep, that's something that unites them. Both believe in conciliarity, that shared authority we talked about, no single supreme leader like the Pope.
Okay, so despite their differences, they share some core beliefs. What else connects them? We've been focusing on their differences, but I'm curious about their common ground.
You're right, it's important to see both sides. One big thing is the idea of apostolic succession.
Ah, yes. The unbroken chain. Remind me again what that means.
It's the belief that bishops can trace their line back to the apostles, chosen by Christ. Unbroken chain of authority and tradition.
So a direct link to the early church.
Exactly. And both Eastern and Oriental Orthodoxy value that. They also share a deep reverence for the sacramental life. The sacraments, they believe, are visible signs of God's grace.
You said they both have 7. What are some of the key ones?
Well, the Eucharist is central to both. The bread and wine, consecrated and believed to become the body and blood of Christ, a powerful mystery that connects believers to Christ. And then there's baptism. It's a spiritual rebirth, cleansing a person from sin.
Powerful stuff. These ancient rituals still resonate with people today. And speaking of ancient rituals, there's one I'm curious about. The veneration of saints and icons. That's something that sets Orthodoxy apart, right? Can you help me understand this?
It's something that's often misunderstood. The big thing is, veneration isn't worship. Orthodox Christians only worship God. Veneration is about deep respect, honoring those who have led truly exemplary lives.
So who are they venerating?
Saints, mainly. They're seen as models of holiness, people who can intercede for us before God.
It's like asking a friend to pray for you, but this friend is in heaven, closer to God.
That's a good way to put it. It's about asking for their prayers, their guidance. And this is where icons come in.
Ah, icons. We had to get there eventually. I'm all ears.
They're more than just pictures. Think of them as windows into the divine, depicting Christ, Mary, saints, biblical scenes. They help connect with the spiritual reality used for prayer, contemplation.
Engaging all the senses, almost. Sight, touch, even smell with the incense.
Absolutely. It's about engaging the whole person. Icons are a vital part of that.
I'm starting to see Orthodoxy in a whole new light. The history, the theology, the way of life. But we can't wrap up without talking about Roman Catholicism. They share so much history, core beliefs.
Yeah.
But there are those key differences, the ones that caused that split back in 1054. Ready to tackle that?
Let's do it. It's key to understanding the full picture. We'll explore those differences. And the first one, remember, is about authority and leadership. Papal supremacy.
Right, the Pope is the ultimate authority.
Exactly. It's a core belief for Catholics. The Pope's seen as the successor to St. Peter, the first Pope. But Orthodox Christianity, they reject that. They believe in conciliarity, shared authority among bishops.
More collaboration, less hierarchy.
Right. The Patriarch of Constantinople, while important, doesn't have that kind of power. Respected figure, but not a supreme ruler.
Got it. So different structure. What about theology? Are there major doctrinal differences between Orthodoxy and Catholicism?
Definitely. Original sin, Mary, sacraments, even the afterlife. Let's dive in.
Lead the way. I'm ready. Okay, so let's dig into those theological differences. You mentioned original sin, for starters.
Yeah, that's a big one. Catholics, they believe that because of Adam and Eve, well, that whole Garden of Eden thing, everyone's born with this stain of sin, separates us from God.
Ah, right, original sin.
And then they've got this doctrine, the Immaculate Conception, which says that Mary, Jesus' mother, she was conceived without original sin. So she was, pure, a perfect vessel for Jesus.
So everyone starts off, like, on the wrong side of things, except Mary.
It's a bit more nuanced than that, but yeah, you get the idea. Now, the Orthodox Church, they also believe in original sin, but they see it a bit differently.
How so?
More like we inherit a tendency towards sin, not that we're, automatically guilty from birth, and they don't have the Immaculate Conception doctrine.
Interesting. Different perspectives on the whole sin thing. Okay, what about the sacraments? We know both churches have 7, but do they see them in the same way?
Not exactly. Take the Eucharist, for example. Catholics believe in transubstantiation, the idea that the bread and wine, they literally transform into the body and blood of Christ.
During communion.
Right. But the Orthodox Church, they also believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, but they don't get into, the mechanics of it.
They don't try to explain how it works.
Exactly. It's a mystery.
Yeah.
They emphasize the divine presence without needing a specific explanation.
So more about accepting the miracle without needing, a scientific breakdown.
You got it. And it's interesting, isn't it? Catholicism often prefers clear definitions, while Orthodoxy seems more comfortable with mystery and, ambiguity.
It's like those icons, right? Expressing truth through symbolism and art, not rigid rules.
Great connection. It's about valuing beauty, tradition, personal encounter with God. Now, back to Mary. Both Catholics and Orthodox, they hold her in high regard. But there are those differences.
Right. Catholics have doctrines like the Assumption of Mary, where she was taken bodily into heaven. Do the Orthodox believe that?
Not as a formal doctrine. They venerate Mary as the Theotokos. It means God-bearer, emphasizing her role in, giving birth to Jesus. But they don't have that dogma about the Assumption, or the Immaculate Conception for that matter. Both traditions believe that saints can intercede for us, but Catholicism, they've got a stricter process for canonization.
So it's like officially recognized saints versus local saints, those venerated in a specific community.
That's a good way to think about it. It's more organic in Orthodoxy, less centralized. Okay, ready for one final difference, and this might be a big one for some people.
Hit me with it.
Divorce and remarriage.
Okay, yeah, that's always a sensitive topic.
The Catholic Church, they're pretty strict. They uphold the indissolubility of marriage. Divorce isn't really recognized. And remarriage, it's considered adultery unless you get an annulment.
An annulment being like the church saying the marriage wasn't valid in the first place.
Exactly. It's a whole process.
Yeah.
But the Orthodox Church, while still seeing marriage as sacred, lifelong, ideally, they're a bit more lenient.
More lenient? How so?
They allow for divorce in certain cases, adultery, abuse, things like that. And remarriage, while not ideal, it's allowed. With the spirit of repentance, of course.
So acknowledging the complexities of life.
Yeah.
Prioritizing compassion, understanding.
That's a good way to put it. They recognize that sometimes marriages fail, and they want to support people through those difficult times.
Well, this deep dive has been incredible. From ancient schisms to all these theological nuances, it's really been eye-opening. I feel like I have a much better grasp of orthodoxy now.
I'm glad to hear it. What stands out to you most?
I think the idea that there are so many ways to experience and understand Christianity, orthodoxy with its emphasis on tradition, mystery, the personal connection with God. It's a unique perspective that's really broadened my horizons.
I love that. It reminds us that even within Christianity, there's this incredible diversity of thought, of practice, and that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. So for our listeners who are now like, I want to learn more, what would you encourage them to explore?
Follow your curiosity. What resonated with you most during our conversation? The Orthodox world is vast. Maybe it's the beauty of their services, the symbolism of icons, the writings of the Church Fathers. Whatever sparked your interest, dive in. Explore with an open mind and see where it leads you.
That's great advice. A huge thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Orthodox Christianity. We hope you've gained some new insights and a deeper appreciation for this ancient and vibrant faith. Until next time, keep exploring.